A stunning story out of California where an undercover California Highway Patrol officer pulled a gun during a protest in Oakland. The officer pointed that gun after the crowd recognized that he was a cop. The question is, was he acting as an agent provocateur? RT correspondent Lindsay France is covering this story for us from Los Angeles. Lindsay, okay, so a couple of details here. My understanding is that the CHP officer and another second officer were actually marching with the crowd, their faces covered, and people thought they were trying to infiltrate the crowd. Is that right?
Well, yeah, the CHP has been working with Berkeley and Oakland police since November 24th, infiltrating crowds. They've got Twitter accounts. They're keeping abreast of instant messages where there's instant message lists, for lack of a better term. So they are sort of a part of keeping their ear to the ground of what's happening, not to prevent the protests, but to prevent the vandalism and the storming of the freeway. So these three agencies have worked together since the 24th. So these officers, when they heard a call went out, they could hear on the radios that a T-Mobile and an ATM were being vandalized. Not only that, but the protesters had turned toward the freeway. They saw one group splinter off, which, Ben, I know you've been in protests aplenty where they splinter off into different groups. In this case, one was a peaceful protest, and then they saw a different group splinter off. That's where they got out of the car that they'd been following the group in, got into the crowd to sort of hear what was going on, to see where they were going to go, and that's when they were identified as cops. And not sure at this point how they were identified as cops. At that point, they turned to walk away when one of them was grabbed and punched. And then that's when the struggle began.
Now, a couple of things here. KTVU, which is one of the stations out there in California, is reporting that witnesses say that these guys were actually marching with the crowd and that they started banging on windows and started inciting the crowd. And that's when people started saying that they were agent provocateurs or police officers. And the witnesses claim that that's when these guys walked away. I guess CHP is denying that's the case?
Yeah, so these are sort of words coming from the protesters on the ground saying that these guys had been a part of the protests and that they had been stirring up trouble. No way really to verify if that's true or not. It's a case of they said that, and these two officers said. So it's very difficult to verify that. However, according to California Highway Patrol, these officers had been following in a car all night long, hadn't left the car until the call went out that these two places were being vandalized. That's when they got toward the crowd on the periphery, and then when they were recognized as cops, they had been at the protests for a couple of days. And so when people were kind of pointing at them, shouting, "Cop, cop," it's when they turned around. And that's when one of their hoods was pulled down. He was punched to the ground. And essentially, that's what happened. So as far as them being agent provocateurs, that might be said. They may have, there may be rumors that they were insiders, although California Highway Patrol strongly denies that this was ever the case.
Certainly so. You mentioned about the hood being pulled down. Also, some of the reports claim they were wearing bandanas. There is a witness who claims and told KTVU that he pulled the bandana off the officer's face and that the officer then punched a black man standing next to him. The guy who says he grabbed the bandana says, "I'm white." A guy next to me who was black was punched in the face, and the black man was arrested. And then what do we know about why the officer then pulled the gun and apparently pointed it at a photographer? Is that correct?
Well, they were being surrounded by a group of, they said, about 40 or 50 individuals. So what happened, according to the officers, was when they were walking away, these guys who were a part of the crowd went up to them, and one of them was wearing a bandana. They were dressed just like your typical protester in this sort of a situation. Hoodies, thick coats, bandana. They were pulled away from them and said, "Are you the cops? Are you the cops?" That's when these guys just started to walk away to get away from the crowd. One was punched to the ground. That's when his partner pulled out a baton and said, "We're law enforcement, step away, step away." The crowd continued to come at them. At that point, this man said he feared for his life. He pulled his gun out and at the entire crowd, which at protests, half the crowd is media, and said, "Get away." And that's when they got the guy who had punched them on the ground and got him arrested, and he's now in jail. So, yes, probably a photographer was pointed at because everyone there seems to be a photographer. But not only that, I saw the same article you did with the guy who says, I'm white, I wasn't arrested, a black guy was arrested. These stories go all throughout the crowds. Again, there's no way to verify if this is true or not. And of course, the protesters say also, well, if they were in plain clothes, we would respect that. Well, would you really? I mean, they would also say, well, what are cops doing around here? We're just protesting. But some of them aren't, and that's the cops' argument is we're there to infiltrate, to make sure people who stop the freeways and who vandalize aren't going to get away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the other side of it, you have protesters who say they're actually dressed like this because they are there to instigate, not just to infiltrate. But Lindsay France from our RT studio, interesting discussion. Thank you very much.